Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to Plaza for hosting this event. My name is Samantha Williams-Chapelsky, and I am an artist from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I recognize a lot of the locations that you're all posting from. I super appreciate seeing where you're all coming in from. For today's workshop, we're going to be playing with some texture that I absolutely love in my own practice. So we're going to have a lot of fun today. And I hope it gives you a bit of permission to play with your paints again. I'm going to get started with a couple slides here and really do encourage questions in the chat. We have an amazing person from the Golden MAS team, Greg, in the chat to take your questions as well. He's super, super knowledgeable on all things Golden. So please feel free to ask your questions. I'll give you a bit of a breakdown of my information. So I graduated from the University of Alberta with a degree in painting. I have been a practicing artist for over 20 years, and I have been trained by Golden Artist Colors as one of their working artists for the past 10 years. So I do work in acrylics, oils, and the odd time watercolors. I'm not gonna lie, they're my least favorite. My favorite is those acrylics, which is always the fun part for me. And I do teach plein air as well. So I'm teaching a retreat in Italy in a couple weeks here. So I'm super excited about that. My own work uses textured paint applications. So I like to use texture in my work, specifically the light molding paste that we're going to be talking about today. What I enjoy about the textures is that it allows me to create movement in a landscape without really painting the movement itself. We're sort of creating the marks with palette knives and brushes to create the effects of movements. So for me, I work with a lot of the paste lineup as well as some of the gels periodically, and I sort of mix in my fluid, my heavy body, and sometimes even my open acrylics into these products. So I'm going to show you a couple examples of using light molding paste. So again, that's the product we're using today. I do use quite a bit of this. It's probably one of my favorite textures right now. I've been using it in significant quantities for the past couple of years and really do find the texture is very much like cake icing. It's really quite lovely to play with. It's very juicy. It's a really fun texture. So we're gonna have a lot of fun today. My landscapes are semi-abstract, so I do use a lot of different tools. Oddly enough, I still use brushes. I use palette knives. I use a lot of found objects as tools as well, but I really do encourage you to try some different tools in your own studio with this product once we're done our session today. Obviously today's session, we're gonna be focusing on palette knives, but you can see all the different marks here are from different tools. And I even go larger scale. So this piece is 5 feet by 12 feet. So we're even using those light molding paste buckets as little feet to prop my paintings up on. So it's definitely a useful product in so many ways. And I really do love using it. So I'm going to stop sharing there. And we're going to talk a little bit about the supplies that you're going to have purchased for today. Super excited to showcase that. I'm going to switch my camera view so you'll just see a bit of a pause. And we're going to go over to the fun part, which is, of course, the actual painting part. So I'm going to run through some of the supplies that we are going to be using today. Now, this palette is a little different than a traditional palette because we are incorporating SoFlat, but that's the fun part. So today, when you're using all of these products, hopefully you'll get an idea of how to use them in your own practice, maybe how much or how little you want to play with the products, or maybe even if you just want to use the light molding paste in one area of your paintings, it's a great product to work with. So we did mention that you have 3 different fluid acrylic colors that you're going to be working with. So we have the phthalo blue, the quinacridone magenta, and titanium white. I will mention that all of your acrylics are friends. So at Golden, we do actually have a lineup of 5 different types of acrylics. So we have our traditional heavy body, which comes in our white tube. That one's really characteristically known for having the texture, really holds brush marks, palette knife marks instantly out of the tube. We have our fluid acrylics, which is the little flat top guy. This one is a very concentrated color, which is why I like using it with my light molding paste. So you get a concentrated color with just a couple drops. You're going to find today, as you're using these paints, you really need very little of this paint. This is going to last you a long time. Next up, we do have the high flow acrylic, which is of course our thinnest acrylic. This one is consistency like an acrylic ink, which is really, really beautiful, very thin consistency. And this one can be used in refillable pens, markers, calligraphy pens. I don't use this with my light molding paste as much because it does thin out the light molding paste quite significantly, and we don't have that same sort of viscosity that we get with just a few drops of this guy. We also do have that beautiful open acrylic, which is our slow drying acrylic paint. Again, a little bit more working time. If you're a plein air painter, you know the frustrations of using these as an acrylic artist outside is painful. So we do have a slower drying paint, which means you have a bit more painting time, which is quite lovely. And then our newest to the lineup is the SoFlat, which you will be using some of today. The SoFlat paint is probably one of my favorite products to mix with the light molding paste. Now, the reason for that is these are completely matte acrylic, absolutely no shine. So when we look at the SoFlat color chart, we can see that the black paper behind them is shiny, but the actual colors are not. These are super, super matte. They're incredibly opaque colors. And when we mix the SoFlat paints with the light molding paste, we actually get a completely matte finish for our paintings, which is really lovely. If you're like me, I'm a little tired of the super high shine finishes. I've always loved matte finishes personally. So I love the ability to just take one of these, mix it into my light molding paste and get that opacity as well as that perfect matte finish. So really great colors here. We are using one of the unique colors to the SoFlat line, which is the Naples Yellow Deep. Absolutely one of my favorite colors in the lineup. I go through the large jars of it. So we have this huge line of acrylics. Realistically, all of these are friends. So you can mix them all together. They all go together. So they're all still acrylics, but we're going to be mainly using this guy here today, as well as a little bit of the SoFlat. So you have your fluid acrylics, we have the SoFlat, which you talked about. Now we have light molding paste. Now this is kind of a neat product. I always describe this as cake icing. Basically, it's that Betty Crocker whipped icing that you get in the jar, really, really light in terms of weight. It is 30% the weight of the traditional molding paste, which is pretty incredible. And it's actually made from hollow ceramic spheres, which is really, really unique. And it does create a little bit of an interesting texture. Now, as a product, it is opaque, but I would say it's slightly less opaque than the traditional molding paste. So we do have a little bit of maneuver room in terms of mixing color in. It's incredibly lightweight. And my goodness, the textures it can create are pretty incredible. I will let you know there's no minimums for creating a textured painting. There's no maximums either. So all of this will have to do with drying time. So how long do you want to wait for your painting to dry? That's how thick the product ends up being. So always fun to play around with. Now today we're also using a Gessobord from Ampersand. These are really high quality panels. Really love working with these. It's really nice to use a panel for anything textured just because then you have the backing support of the panel itself rather than a canvas. So typically with my work, I do use panel supports whenever possible. You'll also need some palette paper, somewhere to do your mixing on. I always recommend palette paper rather than a palette myself, just because this is a little bit messier than maybe your traditional way of painting with acrylics is. So I do tend to use palette paper more often than not. And then some sort of palette knife. Now, I will also let you know that if you did not get a palette knife, you can always use a brush with these textures as well. So there's nothing preventing you from using a sort of bristle style brush with your paste from Golden and getting a really different texture as well. So you don't have to just use palette knives. You can use a brush with these products as well. I just like to recommend to wipe them off on paper towels before watering them off in your dirty paint water, and then making sure you're disposing of your paint water safely. So it's quite a beautiful product to work with. So I think with all of that being said, the only other thing you'll need is some paper towels and a pencil. It's going to be a really fun day. I really encourage you to play with the paint have some fun. And we're going to do some color mixing. We're going to go through the process step by step, so there's no worries, no panics. And if you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat. I did appreciate the fact that those of you from the Nashville area, I was in Nashville last year. Oddly enough, Edmonton has a direct flight to Nashville. It's one of the few places we can fly direct to. But this is definitely a view that I saw all over Tennessee, which is quite lovely. So we're gonna have a little bit of fun with that view today. So we're gonna get started. I have my ampersand panel here, and I have a pencil, and I'm going to do a quick sketch of the composition. Now, for myself, how I approach my own work is sort of titled semi-abstract. So it has a few basics that make it a landscape, but aren't really super detailed, not photographically correct. Even with perspective, we're kind of dealing with minimal understandings of perspective. When we look at a landscape painting, one of the biggest things that we need to find in any sort of space to make it a landscape is actually just the horizon line. So for myself and how I teach, I often like to keep that horizon line sort of at the bottom or at the top of the piece, especially if you're just starting out. That middle horizon line can pose a lot of challenges for all of us when painting. So I would say doing the lower and the higher is easiest. Today, we're going to focus on more of a sky dominant composition. So more focus in the sky part, a little bit less focus down below. I'm going to start by sketching out the horizon line on my panel. Now, I'm going to sketch out a little bit darker with my pencil. I recommend those of you at home doing a very light pencil sketch, because you will find that the color will come through the light molding paste. So you'll see that the light molding paste will have some of the pencil mark coming through. So definitely sketch lighter when possible, okay? So I'm going to start with that horizon line. That is step number one. So I'm going to draw in my horizon line. Now, one of the funny things about horizon lines is they either have to be wonky or they need to be straight. If we kind of do a slightly crooked horizon line, something like that, where it's just slightly off, our brain is going to read it a little strange. So we want to make it really skewed or perfectly straight. So today I'm doing a very skewed horizon line, sort of coming down to the middle and then off to the side. And that way I have a little bit of a funky way of painting into the space. It gives me a little bit of interesting dimension, as well as takes a very simple basic structure and gives it something unique. So once you've got that horizon line on your panel, and remember to sketch quite lightly, we're going to talk about breaking down the space. Now, I know a lot of you were like, well, I need the photo reference. I need the photo reference. There's a fun thing with simplification where we're going to take the photo reference out, and we're going to try to break this space down into 5 basic shapes. Now, this is how I teach my plein air workshops as well. I like to teach students to really look at a landscape and consider what the important parts are. So for our landscape here today, most of it is actually the clouds. We don't have a ton of information in the bottom here. So we're really going to give ourselves most of the information up top. And what we're actually going to do is give you 5 basic shapes to paint from. So it looks like there's a lot more here, but the clouds are going to break up a little bit once we're actually painting. And the bottom kind of remains all about the textured mark application. So we don't have a lot of information to put in there. We have more of a color change. So we've got a little bit of yellow and a little bit of green. So what I'm going to start off with is giving myself 5 basic shapes. So for starters, I'm going to do the top cloud. And as we see a little bit of a change in perspective, we're actually going to have a bigger cloud up top, and then the clouds get smaller and smaller and smaller as they get closer to the horizon line. Now we're doing implied perspective. So this is not reality, but we're kind of trying to create the sense that we are moving through space. Something is happening. We're traveling backwards. So we do want to have those bigger clouds up top. So I'm going to lightly place this in here. So remember, you're going to draw these on very lightly. Mine are going to be a little bit heavier just so you can see. But we're going to do shape number 1, which is this big cloud chunk here. So that's going to be shape number 1. And we have 5 basic shapes that we get to work with. So we're going to give ourselves those 5 basic shapes. And that way you're able to really break down the space according to what's important. So I've got shape number 1. just kind of following this trajectory up here. Shape number 2, we're gonna give us sort of a fatter cloud in the middle here. One thing that I always like to teach with students is we do want something to fall off the canvas or fall off the panel. Landscapes that remain contained within a panel often don't have as much dynamic energy to them. So you want to have them fall off at some point. So if you can create a space where your clouds fall off, it gives us a little bit more visual interest. So that's shape number 1, shape number 2. We have a little bit of a smaller cloud pattern over here, so maybe we'll add number 3. Kind of a simple shape. You can see how I'm drawing the clouds, sort of a little bit of a flatter bottom on some, a little bit wonkier on others. Again, we do have to remember as well that when we're working with a palette knife, this is our tool. The scale of our tool is quite large. So we're not really able to create a huge amount of small details. We can create some, but the biggest scale is going to be our palette knife. So we have to consider that. We have 1, 2, 3 basic shapes. Now I can do 4 with this bottom cloud chunk. Got kind of a few smaller clouds, and we're just going to group them together as shape number 4. Basically looking at that outside edge, not really sort of breaking it into teeny tiny little areas. I'm not putting in these teeny tiny little clouds. These are the fun little marks that we get to make after the fact that we use our palette knife for. I always sort of consider them cheeky little marks. They're things that we really want to play with and have some fun with while we're creating the textures. So we have 4 basic shapes. Now the last shape we're going to do is just divide up this bottom space a little bit, because otherwise we end up with just kind of a solid area. So I'm actually going to divide it up into 2 by adding a little bit of a green space here. Now we can do a lot texturally within this space, but by dividing it up, we know we've got a little bit of a difference in perspective again. So we have the foreground and the background. We have a couple different areas here. And that's basically how I start a painting. And if you give a chance to follow me on Instagram, my paintings, even at a large scale, are this many shapes. There are very few shapes, and it's more because I want this painting to be about the texture. I want it to be about the movement of the texture, not about all the teeny tiny little details. So that's sort of how I approach the starting of a painting. And again, you can see that we've got very minimal information, but when we start looking at colors and color mixing, we're going to get a lot more details. So I'm going to get everyone to get set up for painting time now. So you no longer need your pencil. You're going to need your palette. You're going to need some palette knives. Those of you who are working with brushes, if you do have a palette knife to mix your paints with, that is ideal. If you do not, you can still use a brush to do that. Absolutely. It's just a little bit more messy. And we're going to get going. And for all of you who are new to the painting world, all of these products would have come sealed. So you'll have to pull off the seals, which is honestly one of the things that I love and hate about Golden is I can never get the seals off. But I mean, it means that you have perfectly good product. It just means I can't ever get the seals off. When we start painting today, I will let you know that the light molding paste, just depending on your climate, does dry quite quickly. So if it is hot, it will dry very quickly. So what I tend to do and tend to suggest is that we're going to move through the painting from the top to the bottom, sort of like we're traveling through the landscape. We're going furthest back, coming up to the front. So we're taking our time, making sure that we're doing the back first. So we're not going to mix up tons of product right off the bat. We're going to start with the back blue sky. Then we will mix the clouds. Then we will mix the foreground. Then we will mix the background, and then we'll mix the very foreground, just to make sure that everyone has the ability to work with their paint the longest. Where I am in Edmonton, it's typically quite dry here, so my paint does dry quite quickly, and that's all humidity based as well. All right, so we're going to start off with our blue. Now, I will let you know that we're going to need quite a bit of this product today, but you will have some left over unless you're crazy and you use the whole jar, which is totally fine as well. That is absolutely allowed. And we're going to start off with the sky. So I would say you're going to need about 1 to 2 large teaspoons full. So you can see here how light and fluffy that is. It is absolutely gorgeous. It holds its shape as well, which is really quite fun, but it is so lightweight. So you're gonna see we've got it popped on the palette paper there. Now, this is the tricky part. We're gonna take our phthalo blue. Now, this guy, whenever you don't wanna have 20 drops pour out, it's gonna pour out 20 drops. So we're actually gonna take 2 drops and tuck it to the side of the light molding paste. We're doing this for a reason, because we don't actually want a ton of phthalo blue. This is an incredibly strong color. If you've ever used the phthalos, oh my gosh, the phthalo green, so strong. So we're gonna use just a teeny tiny little bit of it. So I'm gonna pick it up with my palette knife, and I'm actually going to mix it into my light molding paste. Now you can see I use so little paint. So you're gonna end up with tons of fluid acrylics left over. So again, just mixing in that phthalo blue into my light molding paste. So we kind of have a nice neutral blue here. And if you would like it to be a little bit darker, you can, but what we're actually going to do is we're gonna mix up 2 different variations of the color. So I'm gonna take half of that medium blue, I'm gonna add just a teeny bit more of the phthalo blue, just to make it a little bit darker. Now, one of the things that I really like about light molding paste, sort of unlike your traditional acrylics, when they dry, your traditional acrylics usually get a little bit darker. So we do notice a shift in the color. Light molding paste seems to get rid of that. Basically, what you see is what you get. You'll see the sheen change, but otherwise you will not see much of a difference. Now we do have the light blue and the dark blue here. So this is the mid-tone and the darker tone. Now, again, for perspective purposes, we're trying to imply perspective. So what happens in the sky typically is that we do get darker, sort of mid-tone, and lighter near the horizon line. So by having the 2 variations of blue already mixed, we're able to sort of play around with the ability to sort of go from dark to light on our panel. Yes, this is so amazing. I just saw the comment satisfying on the palette knife. Yes, this is like, again, if icing a cake was an artistic task, it is amazing. I also learned that I am not good at icing cakes just because I'm good with a palette knife. So it's one of those things. And please don't eat the paint. So I'm going to apply the light molding paste with the blue. This is the dark version. Now this is the fun part, and this is the scary part. But don't worry. There's nothing to be scared. We're just putting down paint. We're gonna plop this down. Now, I'm gonna put the dark down first, again, sort of keeping the dark in the upper areas wherever I can. And I'm sort of working around my cloud sketch. And then I'm gonna put the lighter variation just underneath it. Now, hopefully you have a teeny bit more light molding paste left. Hopefully you have a small amount. And we're gonna add a drop of titanium white to this mixture. So a drop of titanium white, or I guess 2 drops in my case, you're gonna see it definitely lightens it up significantly. Titanium white is a really strong color, always one of those colors that if you're really looking to tint any of your acrylic paints, this is sort of the go-to. But I'm gonna go a little bit lighter with a little bit of that titanium white, and we're gonna run that sort of along the horizon line. So again, just plopping the paint on. Now, for my students, I always love to say, paintings are supposed to be ugly for a long time. So do not worry, ugly paintings are a good thing. We want them to be ugly. We don't want them to be beautiful right off the bat. Now, with your palette knife, because palette knives are super versatile, I would say do not wash this off. You're actually just gonna wipe this off on some paper towel. Now you can, if you're a little bit more of an environmental practice yourself in your studio, you can use, of course, rags. You could also use a painting that, or a panel that you're gonna paint on top of later. You could apply your leftover light molding paste to that panel, and then it becomes a texture for you to paint on top of later, which is quite fun. So we've got 3 different variations of blue on this surface. They all just look like piles of paint right now, nothing too fancy. But we're gonna start sort of manipulating the paint. Now this is the fun part. Palette knife work is a really fun thing to to practice. It's a fun thing to learn for yourself. It can also be challenging to know that basically you've got all sorts of different angles that you can manipulate your palette knife with. So for starters, we are going to start by spreading out the peanut butter. So basically, we're spreading out the paste to cover the areas that we'd like to be in that blue tone. Again, not worried about how it looks right off the bat. We're just basically spreading it around so that we get enough coverage over all of those areas. And if you go over some of your lines, that's okay. If you get tons of product on the end of your palette knife, you can just swipe that onto your palette knife, pick it up, and put it back on. We're going to slowly work our way to the mid-tone. So basically going into all 3 shades of blue that we have here, not really thinking too much about how it looks right now. Really just spreading the peanut butter out, covering the toast with peanut butter right now, okay? And again, it's gonna look ugly for quite a while. That's okay. That's a good sign. And even we're gonna go into that light blue, transition to that light blue, run that along the horizon line, again, filling up any gaps and sort of covering that space. And again, anytime you've got too much product, you can either wipe it off, plop it back on, or you can use your palette or your paper towel to wipe off your palette knife. So once we've started actually getting the product on there, you can see how easy this is to manipulate. Now, this is a good and a bad thing. We could spend hours just playing with paint. We're going to spend maybe an hour today just playing with paint. It can be very addicting to just play with the product. What I like to suggest is when you're at this point, really start thinking about how you want your paint to move. So with our sky, we don't have a lot of information that necessarily needs to be in the sky. So what we can do is keep this relatively simple. So if we keep our texture in the sky simple, it'll allow us to make our clouds really significant and really quite beautiful. So we're going to start by going a little bit more simple in the sky. So what I like to do with my palette knife is actually just drag it down. And what this does is it gives me a little bit of a blend between the different variations, smooths out the textures, and then basically it's very simple texture. It still is definitely sitting on the surface of the board, but there's not too much information that I'm giving the viewer to look at my painting just in the sky, because I don't really want the focus to be on the sky. So all I've done is basically drag it straight down. Now you can see it still has lots of textured marks. We will lose a bit of that volume once it dries, but you're still going to hold all of the marks that you've made. Now you'll notice that I'm running the edge of my palette knife along the top of that board. This product is really easy to clean off while it's wet. Once it's dry, it's a little bit more challenging. So what I would suggest is as you go along today, just swipe the edges of your panel with your palette knife just to clean off any of that residual product, just so that you don't have any overhang of acrylic. That will dry and it will still be plastic, but it's pretty flimsy. It doesn't have a lot of hold to it and it might crack off over time. So we definitely want to keep it within the panel itself. Now you can see that you could go in here and make all sorts of detailed marks if you wanted, but what we're going to do first is keep it simple while we start adding in the clouds, and then we can always go back in here and really play with all of those different effects, different sort of styles of working. So again, you can really play around with your marks, but we're going to save a lot of that for the clouds, which is more of our preferred sort of texture. And Greg just posted, yeah, texture shrink about 40%. So this is why it's super handy to have the MAS team on, because he knows those exact numbers, where I'm just going to tell you it shrinks a little bit. So thank you. So once we've got our blue on here, we are going to switch to our next set of colors. Now this one is a little bit more challenging. We're going to get into those clouds. So clouds, we have a few different colors in here. We do have a gray. Now you're going to say to me, well, I have a blue, I have a red, a white, and I have a yellow. I don't have a black. How do I make a gray? So neutral grays are one of the best things that you can create with a palette like this. And this palette is actually one of my recommended palettes for any artist starting out. I would actually just swap out your yellow with Nickel Azo yellow, just because it's an amazing color palette to start with. but we're gonna make a neutral gray from all of these, as well as our white for the clouds, and maybe even a little bit of yellow. So you're gonna clean off your palette paper or move to a new clean section. And I'm gonna grab about the same amount of light molding paste. So about a teaspoon is good. Teaspoon, tablespoon-ish, depending how thick you're wanting to do. So realistically with boards or papers and things like that, you can use canvas, you can use birch panels. I myself use a lot of birch panels to support the product itself. I personally love working on top of a birch panel. It's very similar to this in terms of it really lets all the texture sit on the very surface of the piece, which is really lovely. So that's sort of my preferred preference. There we go. So we're gonna use our light molding paste again. Now this time we are gonna mix up again a couple colors here. So we're gonna take about half of your light molding paste that you just plopped down. We're gonna mix up a white. So I'm gonna take some titanium white. Now you're probably saying, well, but this is already white. This isn't actually pure white. This product itself is a little bit off-white, so I would like it to be slightly brighter than that. So I do wanna mix in a little bit of actual titanium white to make it a little brighter and a little bit more opaque, because I do find that it's not perfectly opaque. There is some transparency to the light molding paste itself. So I'm gonna grab a couple drops of titanium white, maybe 4 drops of titanium white into this pile, just to tint this all white. And I'm doing the white mixture first because we're gonna do the gray next, and the gray can get a little bit messy. So we've done the white mixture. I'm gonna slide this over a little bit just so you can see my palette while we do the gray. So we've got our bright titanium white. Now we're gonna do this pile as a gray. Now, grays are a little bit challenging, as I said, but we have all the tools to mix them today, and it's really, really lovely to mix a neutral gray from your own palette. So what I'm going to suggest is that on the side of your paint or on the side of your palette, you're going to put a couple drops of your phthalo blue, a couple drops of your quinacridone magenta, and then we are going to crack open the beautiful SoFlat Naples Yellow Deep. This is an absolutely lovely color. Now, I'm going to suggest making sure that your palette knife is clean before you dip into this. Nothing worse than contaminating an entire tube or entire pot of acrylic paint. But we're going to dip in and we're going to just pick up a little bit of the SoFlat paint, and we're going to pop it to the side as well. Now, if you did get a product that isn't quite mixed, SoFlat does need to be mixed up. So if it does look separated, make sure you mix up your paint. Sometimes they can separate just because they've been sitting on the store shelves. So make sure it's nice and mixed up. SoFlat's a really cool product. It's a nail polish consistency, so it's a little bit different than our traditional acrylics, but super pigmented. We got a lot of pigment in this one, which is really fun. So this is my pile that's going to be gray. Now I've put all of my colors here for a reason. Basically, if I was to pour all of these in, I'm going to make mud really, really quickly. I don't want to make mud. I want to make this a bright, really lovely gray. So I'm going to start with grabbing a little bit of the phthalo blue on my palette knife, and I'm going to mix it into that light molding paste. So I've got a nice even mixture. I like to mix everything ahead of time on my palette paper just so I know what color I'm working with, a little bit less sort of challenging to mix on the surface of the painting itself. It can be done, but this is a little bit easier. Now with making a gray, the first step to making a gray is to make a purple. So we're going to take our blue and then we're going to add a small amount of magenta. Now you need very little magenta. Again, we need very little of these paints today. We can mix in this small amount of magenta and you're going to see that we instantly get a purple. Now, if your purple is really pink toned, you can always add a little bit more blue. If your purple is really blue, you can always add a little bit more magenta. But we are looking for the lilacs on the tree purple. We want it to be that beautiful, bright purple. That's how we start a gray. Now we could use this color in the clouds. It's really lovely. We could definitely paint with this color, but I want you all to try mixing a neutral gray just because it's fun. Now I'm going to wipe off my tool again Every time I sort of do a mixture, I want to make sure my tool's clean. Now you're going to take your palette knife and we are going to dip into the SoFlat Naples Yellow Deep. We are going to add yellow to purple. This is how we neutralize a color. Basically, it takes its opposite on the color chart to make it completely a neutral tone. And you can see what's happened here. Just with that teeny tiny little amount of SoFlat Naples Yellow Deep, we've made a really lovely neutral gray. Now, I will let you know if you went too far and it got green, that's okay. You can always bring it back with a teeny bit of pink. It's always sort of a balancing game. That's why I suggest putting the colors at the top and then just slowly adding them in, because it really can be just that small amount that makes the color happen. So we've got a really nice neutral gray here. This is a really great color to work with, and I would say this is fabulous. I'm going to mix this all together, and hopefully you all are coming up with a fabulous neutral gray yourselves. Once I've got it all mixed, I am going to take part of it and I'm going to lighten it, which means I'm going to add a bit of titanium white. So I'm going to tint it with titanium white. So I'm going to add maybe 2 drops of titanium white, should be more than enough. And I'm going to mix that together. Let's see if that's light enough. Maybe needs a bit more. A little bit more titanium white. And then this is basically our setup for clouds. So we have our white, we have a darker gray, and we're gonna have a lighter gray. And that's gonna be for our clouds. So really lovely colors here. So we've got a lighter gray, darker gray, and our white. So again, color mixing, a little bit of a challenge, but we always start off with a neutral gray. We're gonna make that purple, mix that into our light molding paste. Once we've got the purple, we're going to take the smallest amount of yellow, which again is the opposite on the color wheel. We're going to add the smallest amount of yellow right into that purple mixture. And there you go. It's a perfect match for a gray. Realistically, as I said, most of your primary color palettes can make a neutral gray. Oftentimes I recommend having just a primary color palette rather than purchasing a black. It's just a little bit easier to work with rather than working with a black itself, which can be quite extreme to paint with. So we're going to go back to our painting. Now, I'm going to add the grays into the underlying areas of the clouds, and I want to save the whites for sort of the top. What happens with clouds is we end up with a little bit more of that gray at the bottom, sort of that ridge on the bottom edge, and then the clouds, we're going to add the white on top. Now, again, remember, we're just doing basics first, so simple first, then we get more into the details after. So we're just going to slowly pick up some of the color and plop it on the surface. If you get some blue on your tool, that's okay. You're just going to wipe it off. But I'm just going to plop the color into place. So I'm taking the darkest gray first, and I'm putting that in first. So I'm able to get that super dark gray line on the undersides of the clouds. Again, she's an ugly painting for quite a while. That's okay. We're going to add that super dark gray into the underlying edges. Again, if you get some of the blue in there, that's absolutely fine. And I've got that really lovely dark gray in there. We're going to slowly add that mid-tone gray. I'm going to take some of that mid-tone gray and go right on top of that dark gray. So right up to it, sort of right on top of it, creating a little bit more dimension there. Again, don't be afraid of layering on texture. It's never a problem to have too much. There's no such thing as too much. And Greg can correct me if there's a limit to the volume. I apparently don't follow the rules, so there might be a limit to the volume. But as you're applying the grays here, you can see that I'm just putting the 2 right on the bottom edge, making sure that I put some sort of right on the bottom edge of all of those clouds. Once we're sort of set up with that bottom edge, we're going to go in with the white. So this is where we're going to keep some of the clean white for at the very end as well. So don't feel like you need to use all of your white. Keep some of it because we're going to play around with this a little bit. And you might want to have a little pop of bright white at the very end still. So we've got a fun mess of a painting, and that's what we're going for. So again, you can see from mine, I've got a lot of texture on here. And that's fine. Again, a lot of this will shrink. If I left this exactly like this, it will dry exactly like this. So you can definitely tell it's an interesting product in terms of how it can create textures. Now, there are some really neat tools out there as well that can have like even things like combs or brushes and things like that that have really beautiful tips to them that can scrape through the texture itself. So remember that you can use different tools to really create some different marks. And that's the interesting thing as well, is that with paste like this, we have a variety of different textures that we can make just by our tools. And we forget that artists like Helen Frankenthaler or Jackson Pollock used to use brooms or sponges or things that they found at probably more like a home supply store as their tools rather than what you might be traditionally used to. So play around with tools. That's always the fun part about this process. And we can really see what the textures we're going to get are. Now, again, when we look at this overall, we're going to start thinking, okay, with our clouds, do we want them to feel like they're moving through the sky, sort of transitioning into the sky? Do we want them to feel really solid? Do we want them to feel dramatic? It's all about how you want these to feel. So as we start working with our palette knife here, really think about sort of your goal with this painting. Do you want this to feel windy? Do you want this to feel light and airy? Do you want this to feel like a storm is coming or like it's raining? That's always the fun part about this process, is that we can start really thinking about how we want the paint to feel. So I'm going to start at the top. I always suggest top down, especially if you happen to be left-handed. That will make your life a whole lot easier going top down. But I'm going to drag some of my white down, and I'm going to start blending a little bit of my white with my gray. You can see I'm kind of going in the middle. You're noticing my strokes here are a little different than they were before. They're a little bit more tentative. We're just sort of doing a little bit of mixing, just sort of blending the two areas together. Then I'm going to wipe off in between, do the same here, where I don't have a gap between my white and my gray. Just getting rid of that gap. Now, this is the fun part. Once we've got that gap sort of filled, we have all over paste. Now we're going to think about directional marks. So I like to actually use these really, really pointed palette knives. These ones are really my favorite because they've got the ability to sort of create swoops and create movement through a piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start moving my palette knife through the paint. And you can see what's happening is I'm actually creating a bit of a swoop direction with my palette knife on that very edge. Now, I can keep it like that. Looks a little bit like a croissant, but it's an interesting start. We're going to start with that croissant look, and we're basically going to get that paint moving into the blue. We want the paint to sort of transition into the blue a little bit. And if you mix in a little bit of the blue, that's absolutely fine. We're basically creating these little swoops. Again, little mini croissants right off the bat. You can tell I'm a Canadian, and Canadians are really into their food because every reference I have made for you today is food-based. So apparently that's our thing. It's always a funny thing about Canadians, weather and food. And again, I'm going through this little bottom cloud here, again, creating those swoops, making sure I'm going the whole way. So we've got a lot of croissants going on here. Fabulous. The croissants are simply because we've done our mark making one way. We are going to switch it up and go a different way as well. And this is where I really encourage you to play with your tools. And you can see here, I'm wiping off little bits on my palette knife as I go. You could be putting these onto a spare canvas or something like that if you'd like to save your paint. So definitely if you want to work that way, that's absolutely fine. Now I'm going to go back to more of that dragging down approach where we had a little bit more of a pull down. And I'm only going to do it in a few spaces, but you can see that just by changing a few spaces up, all of a sudden it's really quite interesting. Now, I also added, when you watch me do this, I add some little cheeky marks. Those are called cheeky marks. where I'm basically dragging the paint right into the blue, and we're able to leave that little mark there. And it feels like we've got a bit of cloud movement happening. So again, I'm dragging this in, dragging some of those swoops down. Some of those croissant shapes are gone, making them a little bit simpler, a little bit less croissant-like. I want to do that same up here. Now this one got away with me a little bit, so I wanted the blue to come in a bit. So don't be afraid if you have some blue and white that didn't meet up. You can always drag your blue down. It's still very workable. We're not dealing with extreme temperatures, thank goodness, right now. So you still have some maneuver time, which is good. In the heat, it's very much a different story. But you can see just that bit of movement is really quite lovely. Now, we can go more dramatic if you wanted to, or you can keep it quite simple. But you can see just that little bit of movement adds a lot to this painting. Now, I'm going to touch up a little bit of my white, and then we will mix up a bit of a pink to pop in here. Now, you don't have to add the pink if you don't want to, but I love adding a little bit of pink to a sky. I think it's a really fun thing. So I do have some of my bright white left on my palette, and I'm just going to go back in here, and if I lost some of the white in some of the clouds, I'm just going to squash that right on the surface, basically taking it on the edge of my palette knife, plopping it on top, and you can see that we're really able to layer on top of this. Now there's sort of a little bit of a trick that I say here. It's sort of like a multiple choice test. Your first mark is going to be your best one. So try not to go in and do tons and tons and tons of manipulation. Try to do a few and then leave it. Sort of like the multiple choice test. Your first answer is probably the best one to have anyway. So keep those original marks as much as possible, just to keep it a little bit more interesting. So I'll give everyone just a minute here, and then we are going to mix up a bit of a pink. So we're going to add that little bit of pink. And then we're going to move to the bottom half, which of course is much simpler than the clouds are. And remember, if you are running behind, you do have access to the recording of this afterwards, so do not panic. You can always fast forward through me talking and get to the juicy parts afterwards as well. So we've got our beautiful cloudscape so far. We're going to mix up a little bit of pink. Now I don't need a lot, so I'm going to grab just a small amount of my light molding paste, plop it in a clean area here. Like I said, if you have leftovers and you want to pop it on a spare canvas that you have, fabulous. Now, again, this is where the magenta off to the side is important. This is such a strong color. So your quinacridone magenta is an incredibly strong color. This one, really make sure you pop a little bit of your magenta off to the side. Usually a drop is more than enough. And I'm literally gonna tap my palette knife in. You can see like smallest amount ever. And look at how strong that color is. So that's what Golden is really known for, is their concentration of pigments in their paints. As always, with all paint brands, you pay for the pigment itself, not necessarily the binders in them. So the pigments are the expensive part. That's why you have products like this that are just so pigmented. Now I have the pink. I'm going to add a teeny bit of white to it. So I'm going to add a drop of titanium white because I don't really want it to be bubblegum pink. It's a little bubblegum pink for me. And I'm going to tint it a little bit more even. I'm going to take a teeny tiny bit of my SoFlat Naples Yellow Deep, and I'm going to add that in as well. So I'm basically creating a pink, but it's got a little bit of a yellow tint to it. So less bubblegum, more of like, you know, it still looks bubblegummy, but a little bit less bubblegummy. Again, another food reference. So I've got a little bit of that pink ready to go. We're going to use it sort of on the undersides of those clouds. Again, this is optional, so if you don't feel like adding pink, you don't have to. If you'd prefer to add like a purple, that's fine as well. I always like a little bit of color in the sky just to sort of reflect a little bit of what's happening in the bottom. So a little bit of color in the sky. What I'm going to do is I'm going to load the back end of my palette knife here. And these are the confidence marks. So I talk a lot as an artist. One of your biggest skill sets is going to be having the confidence cape on. Whether you have confidence or not is not the point. You're going to take your confidence cape, you're going to put it on, And you're going to take your little tool filled with the bright pink, and you're going to pull it across some of your clouds. You don't have to do it everywhere, but just in a couple spots, we're going to add that little pop of pink. And again, confidence cape, we're going to pop the color on, then we're going to go back in and play with the color, sort of manipulate it back into the cloudscape. We don't want to have it super strong, but we want it to be there. So I'm going to go back in with my palette knife, make sure that it's not super obvious, but we've got a little bit of pink popping in there. So again, you can see just that little bit of pink really makes those clouds pop, gives us a little bit of visual interest with the color. And again, for our purposes today, we have a lot of visual interest. Now, you'll notice in a lot of my work, if you do end up seeing some of my bigger pieces, I have a lot of these little reticulating marks. So these like really sort of purposeful marks. That's all done with a palette knife. And I do that in a way to sort of give you a little bit more of a geometric mark in an area that seems really loose. So if you do have some areas that are feeling a little too moppy, a little too not enough information happening to them, don't be afraid to add something like that in. So basically all I do is I grab my palette knife and I can go adding a couple marks like that. And again, it gives it some visual interest as well. I always find it's a nice sort of pause for the person looking at the work, sort of experience the clouds, see the texture, and then sort of get stuck in the little purposeful marks rather than the looseness of everything. So again, once you've added your pink, I'll give everyone a minute here, but I'm just going to go along the edges of my panel, making sure that I'm cleaning up those edges as much as possible. We will have gone over them a little bit with the white and the gray. We just don't want to have that residual light molding paste hanging off for us to deal with later. It's a lot easier to deal with now. And this is where I want to be sure that I'm happy with the sky. So definitely finish up your sky here because we're going to move on to the foreground of this painting. So making sure that you're happy with your sky. If you need to add a few more touches of pink, or if you want to blend in some of your grays, this is the time to do it because we do have the time to manipulate the paint. This will dry quite quickly. And I find with the light molding paste, it tends to skin over quite quickly. And when you try to manipulate something that has that acrylic skin over top, it never looks the same once you break that. So definitely try to finish the piece here at this point. And you can always come back to this painting after it's dry and paint on top of it. So that's a really important thing to know as well, is that for all of you who like to revisit artwork, well, you can always come back to this because you can always paint on top of light molding paste. Kind of a neat little tool or thing to know about light molding paste is we can actually use it as a ground to paint on top of as well. So we can apply light molding paste just from the jar on top of a panel, let that dry, and we can do acrylic or even watercolor on top of that product, which is so amazing that you can get this foamy effect to your watercolors. It's really, really lovely just by having that light molding paste as a ground to paint on top of. So don't ever forget that it can be done in a few different ways. We can mix it with our paints, or we can actually just paint on top of it. Great question, Nancy. All dependent on your humidity. I usually find it's dry within a day or two. Now, the biggest thing with acrylics is they tend to lie to you. With your acrylics, what I suggest is not right now while it's wet, but if you put your hand on an acrylic painting and it feels cold to the touch, that means that acrylic still has some water in it. So it still has some water in the acrylic, which means it's still wet underneath. If it is room temperature, usually means that it's dry. So I find my pieces can take anywhere from 2 days up to 2 weeks to completely dry. And it just depends on the volume and the humidity in the air itself. So we are going to transition into the bottom half of this piece, so the lower half of this painting. I'm going to take a clean piece of palette paper because I've got a lot of colors on here and I don't really want them in my painting. So I'm going to just take a clean piece and I'm going to scoop out some more light molding paste. And you thought you wouldn't use up the whole tub. It's one of those things where I go through the larger 128 mil container, or not 128 mils. I don't know what size they are. The larger buckets. I usually do one or two. They usually give me one or two paintings because I use so much of the product itself. It's quite a fun product though for me. So again, I'm going to take about that tablespoon. Now that should be enough for this whole bottom section. Realistically, we have two kind of color tones here, three maybe. We're going to divide this up. 1 gallon, there you go, 128 ounces. That's what I was going for. Thanks, Greg. I'm going to divide this up into 3. So I'm going to have 2 smaller chunks, 1 larger. We're going to do a bit of mixing with our SoFlat. So again, this is such a cool paint. If you have not tried the SoFlats, I highly recommend it. They do come in some really great sets right now as well. These are really neat for mixing into your acrylic practice, plus the colors that are available. Some of these are only available in the SoFlat lineup. Even colors like the fluorescent violet, very strange color. It's a sole source pigment, really beautiful fluorescent color, and it's actually almost opaque, which for a fluorescent is really unusual. So if you get a chance, that's an amazing color to try out. It's one of my favorites. But my second favorite is actually this Naples Yellow Deep, and it's just beautiful. So again, if you haven't tried them before, you're gonna love them. They're a little bit of that weird consistency. So when we scoop them out, making sure that our tools are clean before we pull product out of the jar. We just don't want to contaminate the jars of products themselves. You'll want to stir it up again. If it has separated, it won't have separated by the time we've mixed it today. But I'm going to take a little bit of my SoFlat on the edge of my palette knife, and I'm going to pour some into one of my piles. The larger pile is going to be just that Naples Yellow Deep. And you can see, I mean, honestly, such a great color, but look at the strength of that pigment load. We have basically tinted a lot of light molding paste with very little paint again. So again, here we've got tons of that pigment right in the paint itself. So beautiful, beautiful color. Now we are going to use a little bit more of the Naples Yellow Deep, and we are going to create a really light green. Now this is a bit challenging, so I'm going to grab my light molding paste, a bit of that Naples Yellow Deep. I've got that mixture happening. Now again, remember your phthalo blue, super strong. So we're going to take our phthalo blue, we're going to pop it off to the side, nowhere near the paint itself. We want it far away because it is such a strong color. And I'm going to mix in just a touch, and I guarantee you this will be too much blue, but we're going to mix in a touch. Now I'm going to move this over so you can see the colors. I'm going to mix in a touch. This will be way too much blue, and I can tell you already it's not a bad green, but we definitely need a bit more yellow to balance it out. Because this is Naples Yellow is more of a traditional pigment, it's more opaque, so we're not going to get a super bright green. We're going to get more of like a natural toned green, which is quite nice for this type of painting. We don't want it to be super, super strong. We want a subtle green here. So again, I just added a teeny bit more of the Naples Yellow to give myself just sort of that light green tone. And again, I've got that really lovely mixture. And again, it's more of a natural green, which is quite nice. Again, if you are looking for a traditional palette for yourselves, the color recommendation I would switch out is the Naples Yellow for the Nickel Azo Yellow, if you wanted a better mixing color. So that would be my recommendation for a neutral, really nice modern palette. So we've got our green, we've got our yellow. Now I want to do a color for the horizon line. Now I'm going to
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Could you just, it went a little fast there. Could you just say what the colors were for the green again?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've done the Naples Yellow Deep. So I've taken probably a little bit off of my pile here and mixed that into a little bit more light molding paste. And then off to the side on my palette, I have my phthalo blue far away, and I just literally dip my tool in, add the phthalo blue, and mix it up. And you should end up with a really nice sort of gray green that's just a little bit more of like a natural green. So hopefully that helps
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Never a problem. So your Naples yellow plus a teeny bit of phthalo blue, you end up with that sort of nice neutral green. Not a strong green. We're not looking for like a phthalo punchy green. We're looking for a nice neutral green. Now we are going to do a color for the top of the horizon line. Now again, when we're trying to imply some semblance of perspective, this is a semi-abstract, this is not necessarily true to life, but we do want to have some idea that, hey, this is moving through space. We have something further back. Oftentimes what we see at the horizon line is your colors are quite a bit more dulled, so they're muted, and they're a little bit cooler. So cooler colors push us back, where warmer colors are going to pull us forward. So the cooler colors and sort of the lighter colors is what we're looking for right on that horizon line. So we're going to mix up one more color here. I'm going to take this last pile, and again, you don't need lots of light molding paste, you need very little. And we're going to make a really, really light, cool green. So we got our little bit of light molding paste here. I'm going to open up my Naples Yellow Deep again, making sure that your tool's clean. Don't do what I'm doing right now, because I try to go right in with my dirty palette knife. Don't do that. You're going to take a little bit of your Naples Yellow. Now, we don't need a lot, so I would say just a small amount on your palette knife. We don't want to have a really strongly tinted anything here, so we just want a little bit. You can see it's very faint. We're going to do the same thing with our blue. So again, I'm just going to touch into that blue. I'm going to grab a little bit of that phthalo blue, and you can see how strong that phthalo blue is. Such a strong color. Now, because we just can't tone these down enough, we are going to tint them with some white. So I did Naples Yellow plus a small amount of blue, and we're doing some white. We're keeping this on the colder side. So you're noticing that it's not as warm. This is a little cooler. So I'm trying to keep it on the cooler side for a reason, so that it pushes back in the perspective. So you can see I've got kind of like a mint color. So we've got a mint color, a much warmer green, and then our yellow. So this color again was made with just a small amount of the Naples Yellow Deep, just a dab of phthalo blue mixed together, and then some white to give us that nice mint tone. With this sort of color palette, this is all the product that I'm going to need for this bottom area of our painting. And that's kind of the fun part, is that we've mixed up everything. We're ready to go. We have all of our products ready, and you can see how very little paint of the fluid acrylics you actually used. I have a lot of students who will come to my classes and they'll pour out tons of their fluid acrylics, and these will last you for so long. I mean, the art supply store doesn't want to hear this, but my gosh, these are going to last you a long time. You're not going to need to rebuy for quite a while, which is a good thing in my mind. So I'm going to close up my jars, and then we're going to move on to plopping this onto the surface. So we are going to do the bottom half of this all at once, and you can see sort of a little bit of the idea behind this. I am going to start furthest back. So again, moving through the landscape, going furthest back, coming through like we're walking through it. I'm going to start off with that minty green, and I'm going to pull that right across that horizon line. I'm going to try to get up to that blue as best I can, all the way up. And again, if you go over, that's okay. You can always manipulate it. Just trying to get that minty color on there. Now our second layer is going to be the green. So I'm going to do a little bit different than what's on here. We're going to do the green next. We're going to do that brighter, warmer green. That'll be next. And again, remember, ugly painting first. That's okay. Ugly paintings are a good thing. And then lastly, we are going to do our bright yellow right on the bottom there. And you can see I didn't use all of my paint. That's fine. Again, this is where having like one of those spare panels, super useful, so that we really can use our products well. And then we're going to start by manipulating these a little bit here. So all I'm going to start off with is first getting that horizon line down. So I want to take my palette knife and really sort of create a nice horizon line. So I'm going to basically run my palette knife along the top. You may have to do this a couple of times to keep it nice and clean. But you can see that just by using the very tip of the palette knife, I'm really able to get that nice sharp edge. And then I can clean that up with the color underneath. And I'm just basically dragging this through. So realistically, perspective-wise, this would have the least amount of information. This would have the least amount of color. Basically, I'm just using the color as a way to transfer from the sky into the landscape. So we want to keep this really simple. So all I've done is drag my palette knife through. I've gone horizontally, so I'm switching directions as well here to really sort of amplify the fact that we're in the land now. We're no longer in the sky. And again, if you end up with some extra chunkies on the side, just pull those off. So I've dragged my palette knife through. And then we're going to move on to the next area. If you've got any sort of gaps, feel free to grab a little bit of extra texture and fill those in. What I often recommend for students is if you paint your panel like a color, sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of that color popping through. So don't feel bad about having any of the white showing through. It's kind of nice to have a little bit of that. Now our next area is going to be the green. I'm going to layer that one out here. So spread it out again, sort of that peanut butter. We're spreading that area out. We're spreading that out, and then I'm going to wipe off my tool and do the same with the yellow. I'm spreading out the peanut butter along the bottom here. And again, I'm just basically using a product to fill up the space, making sure that I have enough, that I have it placed in the right spots. And then we're going to move through creating some actual textures here. So again, first we do the general stuff, and then we get to more of the specifics. So with this landscape, I'm going to do something that is very well known in my area of the world. We are a prairie province. We have a lot of crops. We have a lot of stuff that grows, which I know out in Tennessee you do as well. Those of you from that area, those of you from Manhattan, maybe not so much. But we're going to do a little bit of implied perspective here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little point in my painting. So I'm going to take this little point right here. And I'm actually going to treat this as my vanishing point. Those of you familiar with that is basically a way of creating perspective without really having to paint too much information into it. So what I mean by vanishing point is all of my lines in this painting are going to run to that vanishing point. So they're going to want to meet up with that point to connect to it. Now, this is also a great way to tell how much coffee you've had by pulling your palette knife through the texture. Because if you're like me and you've had a lot, some of those little lines get a little wonky. That's okay. That's all in the artist's perspective of the prairies. Sometimes farmers don't farm their fields straight either. So we've got this nice little prairie happening, these prairie lines. You can tell I've had too much coffee, that's okay. And then we're going to go into the yellow, and we're going to do the same in the yellow. So we're going to grab a little bit of an offset set to the yellow. They're going to go to that same vanishing point, and I'm basically just dragging my paint, wiping it off if I grab too much, to create these little lines. And again, you can really play around with how you want that to look. So if you want them to be more straight, obviously you can work on that. Again, all palette knife work takes time and practice. But you can see that just by having a few straighter lines in here, we get some really interesting effects happening. And it just feels like we're sort of moving through space. So if you mess up, don't worry, you can edit that out and redo it. Never a problem with acrylics. You got lots of time to play with the textures. I'm going to add a few more here. Then you can see you've got this really fun little landscape that really has a point of perspective. So we're traveling through space and we're able to really work into this sort of landscape that we've created. So this would be the point that I would say finish her up. You know, if there are things like you pulled too much green into your sky, you can always touch that up. I went really overboard with my green here, so I'm just gonna clean up some of those edges, making sure that you've got any residual texture along the edge cleaned off, just so you don't have to deal with that later. But that's basically where I would stop. Now, I will let you know that you can always come back to this once it's dry and add more to it. So you can paint on top of this with your fluid acrylics that you have. So you can add more details if you'd like. If you want there to be more detail, you absolutely can. And you can even go back in here and say you want to add a little bit more texture. You absolutely can. There's never an amount of texture that's too much. I would just definitely wait for the products to dry themselves before layering on top. So we want to do that test where we're basically putting our hand on top of the painting and seeing if it is dry to the touch or cold to the touch. If it's cold at all, we want to let it dry a little bit further. So as you're wrapping up, think about any questions you might have for in the chat. I'm going to have a couple more slides that I'm going to show you of some of the other textures that are available for you to do this sort of technique with. One of the things that I would like to say though, is that with textured products, remember that it doesn't have to be an all over or nothing else. I can use texture in just one area of my painting. So if I really like this in the ground, I could just do the texture in the ground. That's fine. If I like the texture in the sky only, or if I just want a little bit of texture in the clouds, I could do that as well. So there's really no rhyme or reason or rules that we have to follow by using this texture. But I think it's a really interesting way of creating different effects for our work. So, and you can see each time you do it, it's going to be completely different. So I definitely recommend, if you love this technique, play around, do another one, do the same video a couple of times if you have a chance, because sometimes, you know, just practice can really give us a great idea of some of the ways that we can work with the products. So I'm going to show you a couple of slides while you're all wrapping things up of some of the other textures that are available. We have some really fun textures that are out there that are in the golden paste lineup that I've used myself that I also love. So first one being molding paste. So this is an example of molding paste mixed with fluid acrylics. So the molding paste itself, this one is significantly heavier. So this one is actually made with marble dust, calcium carbonate ground up into your paint, which is beautiful. This one is a little bit more of like a satin finish once it's dry, but of course we get that crazy texture from here as well. This one is a little bit heavier, so I do recommend working with this product on a panel of some sort like we did today, just because it's a little bit heavier. Okay, so this is the molding paste. And again, this one can be mixed with your fluid, your SoFlat, your heavy body, any of the acrylics that we have in the acrylic lineup. Now, this is a really cool one. This is the fiber paste. So Golden's fiber paste can be used as a ground to paint on top of. So being from a province with some pretty significant Rocky Mountains, we do have Banff out here where I am. We have Lake Louise, also have Jasper. A lot of the mountain paintings that I do, I actually paint with my fluid acrylics on top of fiber paste. And fiber paste is a really cool product in that it actually acts like cold pressed watercolor paper, and you can apply it to a panel and then paint on top of this really glorious texture. So it's a really nice product to try if you do a little bit more realistic work, but you're looking to add some semblance of texture to your work, because this becomes that under base of your painting itself. And it's a really lovely product to work on top of. So I do find that if you are interested in doing a little bit more realism, this one's really quite nice to work with. You can apply this with a cake knife. It works really fabulously. And then coarse molding paste. So I teach a lot of plein air classes. This one also, I know Sean just asked questions. You could add coarse molding paste to one of the grounds to paint on top of, as well as molding paste, just the traditional molding paste. If you're an oil painter, your molding paste, your coarse molding paste are amazing as grounds to paint on as well. They are fabulous. But for my plein air folks, I actually use coarse molding paste with my plein air classes, because I find it's a really easy texture to work with outside. Oddly enough, it's an acrylic, but you get a really, really beautiful texture with the coarse molding paste. It's a little bit grittier. We can actually see little bits of marble in the coarse molding paste itself. It's also a little bit more transparent. So when we're mixing in colors, we don't actually end up with super opaque pastel-y colors. We end up with a little bit more true to life colors, which is nice as an alternative, because sometimes using the light molding paste as you experience today, you're seeing that it's very pastel-y. You're getting a lot of light colors, very opaque colors. So sometimes it's nice to switch that up. Now, I will let you know before we wrap up, I know we're going to do our photo because we got to take our Create with Plaza art photos, which is fabulous. But I want to let you know that you can always give me a shout on Instagram. I'd love to see your finished products from today, so feel free to tag me. I do have a plein air workshop coming up in France in 2025, so you're certainly welcome to join me with that. I paint with acrylics outside. Much to everyone's dismay, it does work and it is fabulous. So I do recommend that. You try that if you have not done plein air with acrylics. And of course, Golden has an amazing team. So if you go today thinking, oh my gosh, I have 20 questions, I don't know who to ask, I don't know where to turn to, help@goldenpaints.com. You know, you've got such an amazing team with the MAS team. Materials application specialists who are on staff at Golden. They know it all, trust me. I have not yet stumped them with a question. So if you have questions for them, please feel free to reach out. You can also tag them on Instagram, and they put their phone number in the chat as well. So they're a really great resource as well. So one of the really great techniques and tools and all the information that I can recommend too is of course the Golden Paints website. So definitely check that out. Plaza Art has tons of information in store, as well as their staff know a lot as well. So always feel free, there's always someone ready to help you. So I'm gonna switch my camera, and I think Lauren is ready to do some photos.
Yeah, so anyone who has done one with us before, we love to see your work, show and tell at the end. So if you are open to sharing what you've done with everyone else that's here today, turn your camera on if you don't have it on, put all your tools down, get to a stopping point, share on screen. I'm going to switch to gallery view. You can do that in your Zoom view settings and share away.
Ooh, lovely.
This is like one of my favorite parts. Oh, they look so
fun.
good.
So fun.
So cool.
These are beautiful, everyone. So Nancy popped a question in the chat. If you buy new fluid acrylics, what 3 primary colors would you recommend? So my 3 go-tos are nickel azo yellow, phthalo blue, which you had today, and quinacridone magenta. Those are my favorites for color mixing. But look at all of these amazing works of art. Thank you all so much for sharing. These are beautiful.
They're so great.
Yeah.
And remember, share them on social media. If you guys are active on that, tag Samantha on there so she can see them as well. Create with Plaza Art hashtag. Very cool. This is so great. I even actually shared 2. So let me share mine. I painted with you guys today. Great. This is so cool. Thank you so much, Samantha.
Thank you, Samantha. That was wonderful.
Yes.
Good, I'm glad. I hope everyone had a chance to play.
We always appreciate everyone from Golden for these great workshops. And thank you everyone for coming. We will share the pictures in the follow-up email, Nancy. So, well, we've got a screenshot, so you'll be able to see some of the work from today. All right, great.
Thanks, everybody. That was
Thank
wonderful.
See you guys on the next one. Have a great rest of your day.
Take care,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.